weird, eccentric, unique, revolutionary, visionary, marches to the beat of their own drum. These are just some of the adjectives that you can use to describe Aquarius, and specifically Aquarius rising. So, as an Aquarius rising, Aquarius would be your first house. So, that Aquarius energy is what people see or what they experience when they first meet you or when they encounter you, right? But here's the one thing I will say about Aquarius rising energy and even Aquarius energy generally that I've noticed not only in reading charts, but in interacting with Aquarius energy in real life. You can't really pinpoint it. It's very sort of difficult to kind of have a firm definition of what that energy feels like. And that's for a particular reason. Okay. Now, Aquarius isn't mysterious like, let's say, Scorpio. Aquarius is just eccentric. And that kind of eccentric energy is hard to pinpoint. But if there's one thing I'll say about Aquarius, it's this: they are revolutionary. They are perhaps the thinkers. They can see far into the future in a way that's kind of logical and definitely emotionally detached. But just because you have Aquarius rising, or even if you have like prominent Aquarius energy, it doesn't mean that you are emotionally detached across the board. As a matter of fact, when it comes to sort of your reputation, your public image, you may find that you put a lot of energy and effort, even emotionally speaking, into that. Dare I say, when it comes to work in general, that's where your emotional side may come out. And I don't think that people necessarily correlate the two when talking about Aquarius energy. And for as rebellious and as, sort of off the chain as you may be, there is a particular area where you are probably very structured and very strict. So, if you want to know more about Aquarius rising energy, whether you are an Aquarius rising or maybe you want to understand an Aquarius rising a little better, stick around. You definitely don't want to miss this. Hello, my loves. As always, I hope that this video finds you well and in excellent spirits. If you're new around here, hi, hello, and welcome. My name is Mel. I'm a professional astrologer, and I'm the founder of Divine Feminine Works, where I help people unlock their divinity and discover their magic. So if you're new, welcome. And as always, if you are returning, welcome back. So we are continuing my rising sign series, and today we're talking about Aquarius rising. Okay. So the one thing I will say about Aquarius rising, and this is what I said in the intro, I feel like you can't necessarily pinpoint it. It's very hard to say this is distinctly Aquarian. It just feels, the energy itself just feels different, right? And in the best way possible. No shades, any Aquarians out there. All right. But before we get into the specifics, let's cover the basics, especially if you're new to the channel. And even more so if you're new to astrology, okay? So many of us know our sun sign, we know our moon sign, and increasingly, so many of us know our rising signs. And I love that for us. But what exactly is it? Because sometimes you may hear people say rising sign, sometimes you may hear people say ascendant, okay? So, to preface this, I use Western tropical astrology. And when it comes to the house system, I use whole sign houses. So that would mean that as an Aquarius rising, Aquarius is your first house. Okay. That is your rising sign because Aquarius is the zodiac sign. Now, ascendant is a little more specific. If you look at your natal chart, you'll see something in the first house, and it's either abbreviated AS or ASC. That is known as your ascendant. That is the particular degree, right, that was on the eastern horizon the moment that you were born. So that your ascendant is literally your incarnation, your entrance into this lifetime, and that is denoted by ascendant in your natal chart, and that's the specific degree. So your rising sign would be Aquarius, your ascendant would be maybe 10 degrees Aquarius, right? So let's just get that out of the way so that when you hear them, you're not necessarily confused, okay? So it is the sign that was rising on the eastern horizon the moment that you were born. And like I said, that's your incarnation into the world. It is your entrance. And as an Aquarius rising, you show up, you enter as an Aquarius. So the first house is super important, and your ascendant even more so because it sets up your entire natal chart. That's why it is important to have your precise birth time. That's what helps determine your ascendant and thereby sets up all the houses in your natal chart. So if you don't have your birth time, You'll know where the planets what planets the signs are in. Correction. So, if you don't have your precise birth time, you'll know what signs the planets are in. For instance, you'll know you're a Virgo sun, you'll know you're a Sagittarius moon, or whatever it is. But with your precise birth time, you'll know, okay, you have a Virgo sun in the sixth house, or you have a Sagittarius moon in the 12th house. Again, it sets up the house system. If you don't know your birth time and you really want to have an accurate birth chart reading, I suggest you go to an astrologer who does what's called rectified birth charts, meaning that they can help ascertain what your house and your natal chart will look like, what your house system and natal chart will look like without your precise birth time, right? It's a specific science. Not every astrologer does it. Some astrologers can sort of figure out with context clues and things like that, but there are astrologers who do rectified birth charts, so they'll be able to help you out with that. But in any event, as an Aquarius rising, Aquarius is your first house. Okay. And so now let's talk about what that means first and foremost in terms of your first house and being an Aquarius rising. So, your first house governs your physical appearance. It governs sort of, people like to say it's the mask you wear. I like to say it's like the billboard sign that you hold up. Now, your rising sign isn't the totality of your personality. I think that when you put your sun, your moon, and your rising, you have the very foundation of your personality, and your rising sign is a facet of that. So, what that means is that you sort of think like an Aquarius. You may look like an Aquarius. Your mannerisms, your physical nature, maybe even your aura to a certain extent is very Aquarian. Now, when it comes to thinking, since Aquarius is an air sign, you are typically intellectually sharp. You are expressive, perhaps. You may speak well. But more often than not, I find that Aquarian energy is very visionary, meaning that it could see past what's going on right now and not look into the future in terms of like looking at a crystal ball and predictions, but it's sort of understanding what's necessary for the future, or even just being able to see past what is in front of you. Okay. This really comes into play when we're talking about like inventing or improving upon things, which is very much within the realm of Aquarius energy, right? So you're able to see beyond what something is currently and perhaps see a different iteration of it, or perhaps how it may function in the future. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you just see, like you think that way when you see something tangible like a pen. These could be ideas, these could be concepts, right? I do like to think of Aquarius energy as like a thinker energy. So that may be how you come across when people meet you, sort of how you step into a room. Now, in terms of your physical appearance, like I said, Aquarius energy tends to be out there, and a lot of people like to equate it to like alien type of energy. And so the first house in everybody's natal chart governs how they physically look. So every rising sign has a particular set of physical characteristics. Now, depending on how your natal chart is set up, otherwise, your physical appearance may be not everyone who's an Aquarius rising looks exactly the same, but there are some distinct features. Could be really high cheekbones, it could be perhaps large forehead. Think of an alien, right? And this is no shade. This isn't to say that y'all look crazy. It's just that you have perhaps an otherworldly kind of look or very distinctly sharp features. Again, high cheekbones, large head, maybe alien-like is what people say. Again, no shade. But that's physically how you may look. Now, obviously, that may change depending on the other configurations in your natal chart. But suffice it to say, when we talk about the first house in Aquarius rising, those are some of the characteristics, and that's sort of how you show up in the world. But what I love about it is, so when we talk about the first house, we talk about how we express ourselves. We talk about our opinions, our thoughts, and things like that. And that's very much the realm of Aquarius. And Aquarius can be quite rebellious, okay? One of the ruling planets of Aquarius is Uranus, and Uranus is the planet of surprise, the planet of sudden changes, the planet of unexpected things. It's sort of like thunderbolt energy. And maybe that's how you show up in people's lives. Maybe you show up as someone who just thinks differently, but can really affect change, perhaps rapidly, in how somebody thinks or how somebody perceives you or anything that you're sort of talking about, right? But that way of thinking, that Uranus governed energy really speaks to your rebellious nature, which also speaks to that sort of visionary quality that I was mentioning before. So you're able to think outside the box. And I hate that phrase because it's so overused, but in this case, it's relevant. You think outside the box, you see things beyond what they currently are and perhaps into what they could be, right? You're able to improve upon things, invent things. Aquarius is definitely the sign of invention and innovation. So you can see things, you can perceive things that don't yet exist, right? And that's a beautiful quality. And that is a quality that shows up perhaps when someone first meets you. It's your aura, it's how you speak and how people perceive you, right? But it can also mean that maybe it's met with resistance because maybe you're talking about things that people, if you're talking about things that are beyond what we can currently perceive, some people, they're just not on that wavelength. And I think that that's why Aquarius often gets sort of the connotation of being weird or out there or unique, because we may all see something like this, like it's a pen, right? But maybe you're seeing it as some sort of advanced apparatus for recording or transcribing that we just don't have the mind, or we cannot even picture it in our mind's eye, but you can. So when we're engaging with you, we're kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, this is just a pen. I use it to write on paper, real old school. Meanwhile, you're describing something that can exist 300 years from now, right? So understand that in expressing yourself, it could be met with resistance, or there could be this disconnect because people just, they're just not there yet. And it's not for you to say, okay, let me dumb myself down, or let me, try to fit in order to sort of connect with people. It's about helping people get there sometimes. And it's about, standing 10 toes down on what you see and what you perceive and allowing people to eventually catch up. Okay. Now bring this up this is interesting because Aquarius is also the sign of the collective. So it's not that you fit in, because obviously you don't, but you have this sort of ability to tap into the frequency of the collective. And this is where your unique abilities can really shine, because now you understand the collective, but you're also able to look past it. And that's a very interesting place to be, because you can, I think that Aquarian energy does have the energy to galvanize, right? Not necessarily fit in like, okay, you're just a sheep with everyone else. It's more about galvanizing the collective energy, and then perhaps leading it intellectually, ideas wise, into the future. And if you ask me, that shit is dope. If you're an Aquarius rising, or any rising sign for that matter, and you not only want to know more about your rising sign, but an important facet of your rising sign is how you make decisions. The realm of the first house encapsulates how we make decisions, and your rising sign and its characteristics can really help you understand just how you do that. So, if you are interested, I created this guide, this free guide called Your Rising Sign Strategy, and it takes you through each rising sign and helps you understand not only how you make decisions, but perhaps how to make the best decisions when it comes to things like career, money, and relationships. So if you're interested, you can scan the QR code, which is on the screen right now if you're watching on TV. But if you're watching on mobile or otherwise, the link to the free guide will be in the description box below. So definitely check it out. It's really interesting because obviously so many of us know the characteristics of the zodiac signs and even our rising sign. But understanding how all of those characteristics work in terms of how you make decisions is really invaluable. So, sooner rather than later, get the strategy guide. I think you'll definitely find it valuable. All right. So, like I said before, your ascendant, your rising sign, especially when you know your precise birth time, it sets up your entire astrological wheel. So, therefore, you can understand how the different areas of your life sort of play out, what themes can come up based off your rising sign. Okay. So, as an Aquarius rising, let's talk about how the different areas of your life sort of play out, how they're set up, etc. So, first, let's talk about relationships. So, as a general matter, whenever you want to know about relationships, and in this instance, I'm only going to be talking about sort of romantic relationships. There are a whole bunch of different relationships in our lives, and that are designated by different houses in the chart. But for the purpose of this video, let's just talk romance because that's what most people want to know anyway. So, when we talk about our romantic relationships, you would look to the fifth house, which is the house of romance. So, that's the house of like dating, romance, sort of non committal romantic relationships. And then you would look to your seventh house, which is your house of committed relationships. So, marriage, long term partnership, etc. And if you want to take it a step further, you could also look at the eighth house. That is the house of merging together, right? So, seventh house would be marriage, eighth house would be like the consummation of that marriage. But again, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to talk about the fifth house and the seventh house. So, when it comes to romance, your fifth house of romance is Gemini. So, much much like your rising sign, right, of Aquarius, Gemini is also an air sign. So suffice it to say that when it comes to romance, when it comes to dating, you need intellectual stimulation, you need intellectual stimulation and you need variety. Gemini is very, I like to call it mixy. It's all over the place. It's like the social butterfly. So you love great banter. You love intellectual stimulation. Dare I say, you guys are probably sapiosexuals, right? But you need that banter, you need that communication, you need that variety when it comes to dating, okay? And then when it comes to committed relationships, your seventh house of partnership is Leo. Leo is the king or the queen of the castle. You need to be adored. You need someone who adores you. You need someone who makes you a priority. Maybe you need someone who really speaks to your heart and your passions, right? Suffice it to say that in committed relationships, you need generosity, you need warmth, and a little bit of playfulness. I like this combination of Gemini as your fifth house and Leo as your seventh house. Both of those signs have a very youthful and childlike energy to it. So you may find that relationships that speak to that side of you, that are fun, that are lighthearted, that speak to your inner child, whether you're dating or whether you are seriously committed to someone, those may be very much in alignment with your design, as opposed to a relationship that perhaps has, let's say, a large age gap. Unless the large age gap, it's someone who is very childlike. Like they could be 10 years older than you, but maybe they still act very young or have like a childlike spirit, right? But anything overtly serious, anything very like technical that's not very fun may not speak to you or may not satisfy you in terms of relationships, romantically speaking. So that's a really interesting facet of your life. Now let's talk about money. So, when we ascertain our financial situation in our lives based off our natal chart, we would look to the second house, which is our personal finances and our house of like earned income. This is our money. And then we would look at the eighth house, which is not only the house of consummation that I was just talking about, but it's also the house of shared finances, other people's money. And these two houses, the second house and the eighth house, they're exactly across from each other. So the signs of your second and eighth houses share an axis and a very particular theme. Now, for you, your second house is Pisces and your eighth house is Virgo. The axis of Pisces and Virgo has a lot to do with service. So when it comes to your personal finances, when it comes to, shared finances that you have with like a business partner or a spouse, there's an underlying current of service, right? Now, Pisces is your second house. You make your money personally, perhaps in service to humanity, charitable works, philanthropy, being altruistic, those kind of things. Pisces could also denote like media, film, creativity, even, right? So those are great ways to make money, right? And you have this very sort of spiritual nature, perhaps, to what you do, but very fluid, very fantastical, very like ethereal when it comes to how you make money. Now, those all sound great, but we live in a real world where you have to make real money and real decisions. And so, when it comes to how you make money, or even how you could make money, because maybe you're out of alignment right now and you're trying to figure out how do I make more money, your second house as an Aquarius rising is Pisces. So, think about film, media, writing, creativity, or charity, nonprofit, philanthropic work, right? Those are very much in alignment with how you're designed. And then your eighth house of shared resources. When we talk about the eighth house, sometimes astrology can be super literal. So your eighth house, right, is Virgo. That could mean that your shared income is shared with a Virgo. So it may be someone who's like a Virgo sun or a Virgo rising, right? It could also signify service. So your shared income may come from like being in partnership with someone, like business wise, or may have to do with a Virgo characteristic. It could be like analysis, right? So this could really describe your partner's money. They could be an analyst, right? They could be in the health and wellness space. It really just describes the nature of shared income. Okay. Now, your eighth house is also the house of debt. So, when it comes to debt, you may find that you're very meticulous, you're very detail oriented. Maybe you're someone who is sort of debt averse, right? The characteristics of Virgo will help describe either your partner's income or how you take on debt. And I actually have a video on the financial planets in your natal chart. So I'm actually going to link that in the description box below because we have four planets in our natal chart that can speak to our financial situation. And I describe all of those in the video. So the link is in the description box below if you want to check it out. But in a nutshell, that is sort of how money works for you. Okay. Now keep in mind that this is very broad, high level information. If you want to know more about specifically your financial situation and sort of maybe if how you can ameliorate it, how you can make it better, then the best course of action would be to book a clarity call with me. That way we can, I have several services that speak to this. And so if you're interested and it makes sense for you, we can discuss this and, I can point you in the right direction. So if you want to book a clarity call, the link to that is also in the description box below. And then finally, let us talk about career and work, since that's also an area of life or areas of life that people typically want to know about. So, the first thing we would look at is your sixth house. This is your house of work and health. Work meaning your 9 to 5, what you do on a daily basis. Okay. And then when we look at your overarching career, we would look at your 10th house, which is your house of career and public life. The other thing that you want to look at is what's known as your midheaven, your MC. Okay. Now, for some people, it is in their 10th house. For others, it's in your ninth house, or it can be in your 11th house. But your MC will also show you how, or really speak to your career or your purpose. But for the purposes of this video, I won't be getting into that. All right. So, when it comes to your house of work, your house of work is Cancer. And this is what I was talking about in the intro. Aquarius energy typically tends to be labeled as emotionally detached or very cold, right? Aquarius is very mental, very logical. But surprisingly, when it comes to work, that is where you have a lot of emotion. And Cancer is the sign of nurturing, of caretaking. So perhaps what you do on a daily basis may have to do with that, may have to do with nurturing, caretaking. Anytime I think of Cancer energy, I think of a nurse. So maybe some of you guys could be nurses, you could be in healthcare, you could be in healing. Or it just means that whatever you do on a daily basis, you put emotion and you put emotional effort and nurturing, or maybe your job requires you to develop something. And how you do it not only gives you emotional satisfaction, but you may pour your emotions into it. And so that's sort of what you do on a daily basis. And keep in mind, your sixth house and your 10th house, they are connected to your second house of money. So if you notice something here, Cancer is your sixth house of work and health. Your second house of earned income is Pisces. So if we're talking about work, if we're talking about money, emotions play a large role in that. And again, if you want to know more about that in your particular situation, like what's going on with you, book a clarity call. Okay. But now let's move on to your 10th house of career and public life. That is Scorpio. So, Scorpio as the 10th house, this could be a place in your life where you hold a lot of power. You may have a lot of pull. You may have a lot of influence, even. Scorpio is the sign of power. Now, this could also mean if you haven't developed this power within you, maybe you feel a little less than powerful, maybe a little powerless, right? But Scorpio has a lot to do with transformation. So your career broadly may have that theme of transformation in it. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you perhaps are like a plastic surgeon, right? Although you could be, depending on the other configurations in your chart. That's like a literal transformation, transforming how people look. But the energy, the concept of transformation is inherent in your career, or at least it should be. Maybe you're not in alignment with your career. Maybe you're in a job you hate, career you can't stand. To get back into alignment, you'll need to tap into that Scorpio energy. And that's not saying to do anything like mystical or anything like that. It's just maybe your calling is to help people transform, to help them understand transformation. And I like this because as an Aquarius rising, you can perceive things that are not currently present, right? It's visionary. That works really well when we're talking about helping people transform, helping people understand transformation, right? See how everything starts to work together? I love that for astrology. But transformation is definitely a huge part of your career, right? Maybe you have something to do with finance even. Scorpio is on the same axis as Taurus, and Taurus is the bull, like the bull on Wall Street. So perhaps you do finance, but it has some sort of transformative nature to it. Like imagine that you are like a trust and estates attorney. You draft wills for people, right? That would be kind of scorpionic in a way. But I hope you catch my drift with respect to what I'm saying about your career. It's transformative. So think about it. Is your career transformative? Do you work in a transformative kind of field or even a financial field? Let me know in the comments below. I'd be dying to know. But in essence, that's sort of how your life works as an Aquarius rising. Because again, Aquarius as your first house sets up everything else. So if you want to know about money, you would look to your second and your eighth house. Career and work, you'd look to your 10th and your sixth house. Romantic relationships, you'd look to your fifth and your seventh house. All right. So hopefully that all makes sense. Now, here's where things get really interesting. One of the things I love about astrology is that it really kind of can go hand in hand with psychology. And if you are familiar with the work of Jung, right? He speaks about the shadow self. And of course, your shadow self and your shadow side is, you can see it in your natal chart, and it's represented by your 12th house. Your 12th house is the house of what's hidden. It's the house of what you can't see. It's the house of sort of your subconscious programming that's always running in the background, but that you're not always able to consciously perceive. As an Aquarius rising, your 12th house is Capricorn. Now, interestingly enough, Capricorn and Aquarius share a ruling planet, which is Saturn. But Aquarius also gets an extra ruling planet, which is Uranus. So Capricorn and Aquarius aren't necessarily too different, but when you add Uranus to the mix, you can see how they can very much deviate from a central theme. Saturn is about structure. When we talk about Capricorn energy, it's rigid, it is frozen in time, it's very stable, almost unmovable to a certain extent. And that's what your inner world is like. Now, when we talk about Aquarius, I kept saying visionary. It's weird, it's out there. That's because of Uranus. Uranus is a visionary because it understands structure. And in understanding structure, you know how to break that structure, dismantle that structure. It's like the real rebels aren't necessarily just reckless. They know how to break the rules because they know the rules to begin with. And so you come across as a rebel, as a visionary, as someone who sees beyond what's currently perceivable. But underneath it all, you are very structured, very rigid. And perhaps that rigidity is what helps inform your decisions subconsciously, unconsciously, but it can also represent what keeps you stuck. The Saturn energy is represented by Capricorn. It's great for stability, but not for movability. And as an Aquarius, you are 10 steps ahead, at least mentally. You're looking into the future. You're seeing things that don't yet exist, but perhaps fear, programming that comes from the patriarchy, mm, or perhaps even societal constructs can be so deeply embedded within you that that visionary quality may be hindered in a sense, may be obstructed, may be challenged. So as much as a rebel and as much as you may be out there, on the inside, you could be stuck. There could be fears there. There could be such rigid programming that doesn't allow you to perceive the future and sort of march to the beat of your own drum. So it's really important that you examine that. When we talk about how we express ourselves and how we show up in the world, aka our first house, we kind of have to look at our 12th house to understand what else is going on under the surface that can affect how we show up and how we express ourselves. And so, as rebellious as you may be, it's like you're simultaneously the strict father that's giving you a curfew and limitations, while also being the rebellious teenager who sneaks out in the middle of the night. And sort of reconciling those 2, it's not about, canceling that strict subconscious programming, it's learning to work with the 2 and integrate the 2 so that you can show up as the quirky visionary that you are meant to be. All right, my loves, that's pretty much all I've got for you for this Aquarius Rising video. I sincerely hope that it made sense. I sincerely hope that you got some valuable information from it. And if you have, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Share this with an Aquarius Rising or even anyone with prominent Aquarius placements that you know, because I'm pretty sure they need to hear this information. Now, don't forget, if you want to know more about your rising sign, download my free rising sign strategy guide. If you want to know next steps, if you're interested in getting a natal chart reading, anything like that, book a clarity call and we can chat. All right, my loves, thank you so much for tuning in. I sincerely appreciate it. If you like this content, if you want to see more, if you want to have access to some perks, consider joining my channel membership, The Inner Orbit. That's where you'll find all of that good stuff. It's also a great way to support the channel so I can continue bringing you all of this great information. All right, my loves, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.